The race that ultimately saved the world was not forged in the fires of a great war, nor was it born from a line of mighty kings. It was a humble people, a forgotten offshoot of humanity, whose true origin is the greatest anthropological mystery of Middle-earth. Their innate resistance to absolute power was a quality so profound, it makes the wisdom of Elrond and the strength of Aragorn seem like inadequate defenses. This is the story of how the smallest of peoples became the fulcrum upon which the fate of Arda turned. They are called the Halflings, the Perianath, a people of little size and less renown. For thousands of years they lived in quiet obscurity, their history a blank page in the great libraries of Gondor and Rivendell. Their concerns were agricultural, not political. They chronicled the genealogies of their own families with meticulous care, but cared nothing for the lineage of kings. They were considered a jest, a quaint and rustic folk, with an unusual fondness for food and pipeweed. They were a profound mistake in the calculations of the wise. In the grand chronicles of the First and Second Ages, they are not mentioned. Not once, while the Noldor waged their ruinous war against Morgoth, and the men of Númenor built an empire to challenge the heavens, the ancestors of the Hobbits lived in secrecy, far to the east, in the upper vales of the great river Anduin. They were, by all accounts, a branch of the race of men. But they were different. Something in their spirit had diverged from their taller, more ambitious kin. They desired not dominion, nor endless life, nor secret knowledge. They desired peace. They desired a good-tilled earth, a warm hearth, and the company of friends. And in a world defined by the lust for power, this simple desire became a shield no evil could easily comprehend or pierce. The lore of Elves and Men speaks of their gradual separation in the mists of time. Sometime after the awakening of the Atani, the fathers of men, in the distant land of Hildorian, a group splintered off. They were smaller, Shire, and sought not the light of the Valar in the west, but the quiet shelter of the deep woods and river valleys. While their brethren marched onward to become the Edain, the heroes of the First Age, these people simply remained. They hid themselves. This act of remaining, of refusing the grand march of history, is the first key to understanding their nature. The great tragedies of the legendarium are almost universally born of pride and overreach. The desire of Fëanor for the Silmarils, the ambition of the Númenóreans for immortality, the lust of Sauron for total control. The Hobbits, in their very essence, rejected this temptation from their earliest beginnings. They chose the small, the tangible, the real. But why did they finally leave their ancestral home? What force could drive a people so enamored with peace and quiet to undertake a perilous journey across the misty mountains? The answer is a familiar one. A shadow began to grow. The power of Sauron, building his fortress in Mordor, began to poison the lands. The air grew dark, and the great forest, that would one day be called Mirkwood, fell under a creeping dread. Men in the region grew savage, falling under the Dark Lord's dominion. The Hobbits, unable to fight and unwilling to serve, did the one thing they had always done. They hid, and they moved on. This great migration, occurring over centuries around the year 1000 of the Third Age, was not one single event, but a slow, westward trickle of a people seeking refuge. It was during this time that the three distinct breeds of hobbitkind became apparent, each choosing a different path that would shape their character for all time. First were the Harfoots. They were the most numerous, the most typical of the hobbits we know. They were smaller and browner of skin, beardless and shadless, with nimble hands and feet. They were the first to cross the mountains, and for a long time they lived in the foothills, associating with the dwarves who delved there. Their love of highlands and hillsides was born in this era, and it was they who first began the practice of digging tunnels and flati, smeals, for homes. They were the heart of the Hobbit people, preserving their oldest traditions. Then came the Stoors. They were a hardier, broader folk. They lingered longer in the vales of Anduin, living by the river, and some of their kind would remain there for centuries to come. The people from whom Smeagol, later called Gollum, would descend. Those that did cross the mountains settled far to the south, in the damp marshlands of Dunland, and along the river that would become the Brandywine. They were less shy of big folk, and were the only hobbits to ever use boats. Last to come were the Falahides. They were the fewest in number, but they would have a disproportionate impact on hobbit history. They were taller, fairer of skin and hair, and loved trees and woodlands. They were bolder and more adventurous, quicker of speech and mind. They crossed the mountains north of Rivendell, and befriended the elves they found there. It was from the Falahides that the great families of the Shire would arise, the Tooks and the Brandybucks, those with a spark of wanderlust in their blood. These three streams of a single people eventually began to merge, drawn together in the land of Eriador. The memory of their distinct origins faded into folklore, but the traits of each breed would live on in the families of the Shire. But a question remains. If they were merely a divergent branch of men, why were they so different? What explains the profound peace in their hearts? A peace that acted as an incorruptible armor. The answer lies not in their biology, but in their spirit. Tolkien suggests that hobbits represent a kind of pastoral ideal, a vision of humanity uncorrupted by the industrial age and the insatiable greed it represents. They are what men could have been, had they not fallen so far under the shadow of pride. They have almost no ambition for wealth or power, finding such pursuits to be tiresome adventures. This is not simple ignorance, it is a form of profound, innate wisdom. When Sauron poured his malice, his will, and his lust for domination into the One Ring, he created a weapon that preyed upon the desires already present in the hearts of his enemies. The mighty, it made mightier and more terrible. The wise, it tempted with a twisted vision of order. The proud, it enslaved utterly. The ring finds the crack in every soul, the hidden desire for control, and it expands it until the bearer is consumed. But in the heart of a hobbit, the ring found so very little to grasp. What could it offer Samwise Gamgee? The power to turn all the world into a garden? He already had a garden, and it was all he required. What could it promise Merry or Pippin? Rule over great realms? They would much rather share a pint of ale with their friends. This immunity was not absolute, but it was astonishingly potent. The ring's promises of power were, to the hobbit mind, simply uninteresting. They were nonsensical. This quality, this hobbitness, is more than just a cultural quirk. It seems to be a fundamental spiritual trait, a resistance to the very frequency of evil that Sauron broadcasted. While the greatest of elves and men had to actively fight the ring's temptation with all their will, a hobbit's primary defense was a simple, almost dismissive lack of interest. It was an unforeseen loophole in the Dark Lord's grand design. He, who could not comprehend a will that did not desire power, had no defense against it. So how did this remarkable people, after centuries of hiding, finally coalesce into the nation we know as the Shire? In the year 1601 of the Third Age, the Falahide brothers, Marcho and Blanco, led a great host of hobbits across the River Brandywine. They entered the lands of the old kingdom of Arnor, which by then was deserted and in ruin. Here they found fertile soil and gentle, rolling hills. It was a land made for them. They received permission from the king at Fornos to settle the land, on the condition that they would maintain the Great East Road and the Bridge of Stonebows. This they did, and here they finally found their permanent home. They settled, and for another 1,000 years, the world forgot them. And they, in turn, were quite content to forget the world. Their history became a quiet and peaceful one, marked only by the passing of seasons in the occasional long winter or fell winter. They prospered in their isolation, but this peace was an illusion. Their quiet corner of the world was being guarded. Unbeknownst to them, the Rangers of the North, the last descendants of the Númenórean kings, patrolled their borders, turning back the evils of the wild so that the simple folk within could live untroubled. It was a secret, selfless vigil. But this raises a chilling question. Why? Why would the heirs of Isildur spend 1,000 years protecting this one small, insignificant land? Was it mere kindness? Or did they, or perhaps their wise counselors like Gandalf, sense that the hobbits were something more? That they were not just a people to be protected, but a weapon to be held in reserve. A weapon for a war that had not yet come. Was their entire history of quiet isolation a mere prelude? A long, patient cultivation of the one quality that could face the coming darkness? Was their entire history of quiet isolation a mere prelude? A long, patient cultivation of the one quality that could face the coming darkness? The answer is yes, but the architects of this plan were not men, and its discovery was not Gandalf's. The truth is far more profound, and it recasts the entire history of Middle-earth. To understand it, we must look beyond the Third Age, beyond even the fall of Númenor, to the very music of creation. The Valar, the angelic guardians of the world, were forbidden from directly dominating the children of Ilúvatar. Their every attempt to impose order by force had resulted in catastrophe. They guided the elves, who eventually faded. They gifted the men of Númenor, who fell to pride and corruption. Every direct intervention seemed to sow the seeds of its own failure. So what if they tried something else? What if they planted a seed, an idea? A people so humble they would be beneath the notice of gods and tyrants alike. This is the great, unspoken secret of the hobbits. They may not be a secret project, but a quiet prayer, a living embodiment of the world that was meant to be, sown into the soil of Middle-earth by the Valar themselves, not as soldiers, but as a standard, a reminder of what is truly worth fighting for. Their love of gardens, of food, of simple fellowship. This is not a cultural quirk. It is the very essence of Yavanna's design, a spirit that finds its strength not in steel, but in the soil. And Gandalf? He was not the puppet master. He was the detective who stumbled upon the secret. Why did he spend so much time in the Shire? Why befriend this strange, unimportant people? Because the Astari were sent to contest Sauron. And Gandalf, the wisest of them, realized that power could not defeat power. It would only be replaced. He was searching for a loophole, an antidote to the poison of dominion that had infected the world. And in the Shire, he found it. He found a people who had been marinating in peace for 1,000 years, their spirits inoculated against the very temptations that had broken kings and sorcerers. He didn't create the weapon, he merely recognized it for what it was. But this theory presents a terrifying paradox, a monstrous, shrieking contradiction named Gollum. If hobbits were this incorruptible ideal, how could one of their kind become the creature most utterly enslaved by the ring in the history of its existence? Smeagol the Stour was, by all accounts, a hobbit. How could the Valar's secret design fail so catastrophically? The answer is as tragic as it is simple. The ring did not find a crack in the hobbit spirit. It found a crack in Smeagol's spirit. He was an aberration, a hobbit born with an un-hobbit-like heart, filled with malice, suspicion, and a lust for secrets. The ring's evil didn't need to create a foothold in Smeagol. One was already there, waiting. He murdered his cousin for the ring, not because he was a hobbit, but because he was, at his core, a bad person who happened to be one. And yet, even in this catastrophic failure, the sheer resilience of the hobbit spirit is staggering. An elf, a dwarf, or a man would have been consumed by the ring in a matter of years, their spirit hollowed out and replaced entirely by the will of Sauron. Smeagol held the ring for 500 years in solitude, and through all that time, some shred of his former self, a miserable echo of Smeagol, survived. The ring could never fully digest him. His hobbit nature, however twisted, gave him a resistance that even the wise could not have predicted. He is the ultimate proof of both their vulnerability and their impossible strength. This cosmic significance remained hidden, a secret kept even from the hobbits themselves. For the plan to work, their innocence had to be absolute. They could not know they were important. Their humility had to be genuine, not a role they were playing. They had to be protected and forgotten, allowed to ripen in their quiet corner of the world. This long, quiet age of the Shire was not an accident. It was an incubation. So when the shadow began to stir again, when the Nine rode forth, and the eye of Sauron turned back to the world of Menon, the conditions were finally perfect. The greatest weapon against the Lord of the Rings was not a sword reforged or a hidden army of elves. It was a single hobbit, living in a comfortable hole under a hill, who was about to have a very unexpected party. And so, the greatest story of the Third Age began not with a king, but with a burglary, an adventure that would take the ring, Melkor's ultimate instrument of dominion, and place it not in a fortress or a dragon's hoard, but in a hobbit hole's pocket. This was not an accident. This was a single, unexpected note in the great music of the Ainur, a theme of the small and the simple, woven by Ilúvatar himself into the fabric of creation, a counter-melody to the crashing discord of power and pride. The ring that Bilbo found was a seed of that ancient discord, and it fell, by chance or by design, into the one soil where it could be contained, where its poison could be resisted, however imperfectly, for decades. For when all the power of the world had failed, when the wisdom of the elves had faded, and the strength of men had been broken, the final act belonged to the gardeners, the keepers of peace. The burden passed from Bilbo to Frodo, and the Valar's quiet prayer faced its ultimate test. They were sent into a world of ghosts and kings, of monsters and demigods, armed with little more than courage and the love of their home. And every step of their journey was a testament to the secret strength that Gandalf had found. The strength to resist, to endure, and most importantly, to pity. That choice, to spare the wretched creature who was the catastrophic failure of their kind, was the note that would ultimately unravel Sauron's entire symphony of hate. For it was not a king's command that brought the ring to the fire, but a gardener's loyalty. And when the quest reached its end, at the very crack of doom, when the hero's will finally broke under the impossible weight of the burden, the Valar's plan revealed its tragic, paradoxical genius. The ring was not destroyed by an act of will, but by an accident born of pity and obsession. A hobbit's failure saved the world. Even the aberrations served the music. The prayer of Yavanna was not for a perfect soldier, but for a people whose simple goodness, and even their flaws, could find a path where strength and wisdom could not. And when they returned, they found the war had followed them home. Here, the plan came to its true fruition. They did not wait for a king. They did not pray for a wizard. They saved themselves. They tended their own garden. Because the ultimate victory against the shadow is not just in destroying it, but in knowing how to rebuild the light. In knowing what is truly worth fighting for. This is the ultimate secret of Middle-earth. The grand design hidden in plain sight. That the fate of creation is not decided in the clash of gods and armies, but in the heart of the smallest person, in the quiet, everyday acts of ordinary folk. The threads of the great music are woven through every leaf and every stone, from the shores of Valinor to a single round door in a hill. And there are so many more stories to tell. To journey deeper into the lore of Arda and uncover the secrets hidden within its grand design, subscribe to the Silmarillion Chronicles.